I noticed the first change in Celeste on a Monday morning. She stepped out of the bedroom wearing a silk blouse I hadn't seen before, tucked neatly into a pencil skirt that hugged her in all the right places. She'd always dressed well, but this was different. More effort, more precision. Her perfume lingered longer than usual when she passed me in the hallway. "New outfit?" I asked, watching her pour coffee into her travel mug. She glanced up, smiling like it was nothing. "Yeah, just something I picked up over the weekend." I nodded, not pushing. But I knew her. She hated shopping. She used to joke about how I was the one with the better eye for clothes, how I had to drag her into stores. Now she was making impromptu purchases on a random weekend. It was a small thing, but it scratched at the back of my mind. At the front door, she hesitated, checking her phone before sliding it into her purse. Another small thing. Normally, she kissed me goodbye without a thought. Today, she was distracted. "I'll be late tonight," she said, glancing at me. "There's a strategy meeting with the new VP. We're restructuring a couple of departments, and he wants input from everyone on the executive team." She gave me that smile again. Not forced, not nervous, but not quite right either. "All right," I said, leaning in, brushing my lips over hers. The kiss was quick, routine. But I felt it, the way she pulled back just a second sooner than usual. I let it slide. That night, she came home past 10. I was in my office, running through numbers for a new acquisition. The sound of the front door opening barely registered until I heard her heels clicking across the hardwood. She moved quietly, like she didn't want to wake me. I stepped into the hallway just as she was setting her purse down on the console table. Her hair was still smooth, makeup fresh, no sign of exhaustion from back-to-back meetings. "Hey," I said, watching her closely. She looked up, surprised to see me still awake. "Hey, long day." I nodded. "How was the meeting?" She sighed, rolling her shoulders. "Exhausting, but productive. The new VP is intense. Wants everything overhauled in half the time it should take. I swear, I don't know when I'm going to breathe these next few weeks." She walked past me toward the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of water. I followed. "Sounds like a pain in the ass," I said. She laughed, shaking her head. "You have no idea." I leaned against the counter, watching her take a sip. "I could clear my schedule, take you somewhere for a weekend. Get away from all this work nonsense." She smiled, but it was distant. "That sounds amazing, but right now isn't a good time." I didn't push. Instead, I nodded, stepping back. "All right, just let me know when things slow down." That night, in bed, she turned toward me, her hand resting lightly on my chest. She traced circles over my skin, her touch deliberate. We hadn't been like this in a while, not without me being the one to initiate. I didn't question it. I let it happen. But when she fell asleep, her breathing steady beside me, my mind kept circling back. The new outfit, the new perfume, the quick glances at her phone. It wasn't much. Not yet. But my instincts told me something was shifting. And my instincts had never been wrong before. The night Celeste told me she'd be working late again, I didn't argue. I just watched her. She was getting better at lying. There was a time she'd stumble through an excuse, avoiding my gaze. Now she looked me in the eye, delivering the words as smoothly as if they were fact. I let her leave without a word, waited 10 minutes before grabbing my keys. The drive downtown was quick. I parked across from her office building, blending into the traffic of the city. I had no real plan, just a need to see if she was where she said she'd be. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as employees trickled out, one by one. Celeste wasn't among them. I checked the clock. Nearly 8. I should have gone home. Should have let it go. But the knot in my gut wouldn't loosen. I started the car and drove. Her usual routes were burned into my memory. Morning coffee spot, favorite lunch place, the back roads she preferred to take home. Tonight, She took none of them. Instead, she turned down a boulevard I knew led straight to the business district. The place where deals were made over whiskey and trust was nothing more than a transaction. She didn't stop at her office. She didn't stop at any office. She pulled into a valet lot outside a hotel. I parked a block away, watching from the shadows. Celeste stepped out of her car, smoothing the front of her dress. Black, fitted, different from what she wore that morning. The same perfume drifted through the air when she moved past the doorman. She wasn't alone. A man fell into step beside her. Dark suit, controlled posture. I knew his type before I even saw his face. Corporate, polished. The kind of man who had something to hide. My pulse ticked up as I followed them from a distance, staying out of sight. They walked through the lobby, past reception, disappearing into the bar at the back of the hotel. I could have turned around then. Could have gone home and waited for her excuse. Let her tell me another well-rehearsed lie. But I didn't. I walked in after them. The bar was dimly lit, expensive, designed for discretion. I spotted them immediately, tucked into a corner booth. She was leaning in, talking low, her fingers wrapped around a glass of red wine. The man listened, nodding, eyes fixed on her like she was the only thing in the room. She was smiling. Not the polite smile she gave me at home, but something else. Something real. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to stay put. It wasn't jealousy that twisted in my chest. It was something colder. A calculation, clicking into place like a puzzle I didn't know I'd been piecing together. She wasn't careless. She wasn't reckless. She knew exactly what she was doing. I didn't wait for them to notice me. I turned and walked out, my mind already working ahead. The cracks in the glass had been small before. Now they were spreading. Fast. I was going to find out why. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to the one place I knew I'd get answers. The office of Gideon Rains sat in a nondescript building downtown. No signs, no fancy entrance, just a steel door with a coded lock. I hit the buzzer. A second later, his voice crackled through the intercom. "You're working late," he said. "Let me in." A short beep sounded before the lock released. Inside, the place was what it always was. Functional, clinical. A desk, a bank of monitors, a leather chair that had seen better days. Gideon leaned back in it, fingers still moving over his keyboard. He didn't look up. "You need something," he said. "I need everything." That made him pause. He turned, studying me with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "This about your wife." I didn't answer. That was answer enough. He sighed, rubbing his jaw. "All right. How deep are we going?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photo I'd taken earlier, Celeste, seated across from the man in the dark suit, leaning in close. I turned the screen toward him. This deep. Gideon took the phone, zooming in. "You know who he is?" "Not yet." He nodded. "I'll find him." I leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "I don't just want him. I want everything. Where she goes, who she talks to, every call she makes. I want to know what she's doing before she does it." Gideon tapped his fingers on the desk, considering. "That's not standard tracking. That's full surveillance. You sure you want to go that far?" "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." He studied me for a long second before nodding. "All right. You'll get updates as I find things. Give me a few days." I pushed off the desk, heading for the door. His voice stopped me. "You expecting to find what you think you're gonna find?" I turned, meeting his gaze. "I don't know what I expect. That's why you're here." He nodded once, already turning back to his screens. I left, stepping out into the cold night air. A few days. That was all it would take to know exactly what kind of game Celeste was playing. 3 days passed before Gideon called. "Got something for you," he said. "Come by." I was already on my way before he hung up. When I stepped into his office, the first thing I noticed was the file sitting on his desk, thick with photographs and documents. The second thing was the way he looked at me, like a man who had uncovered something he wasn't sure I was ready to see. I sat down, waiting. Gideon flipped open the file and slid the first photo toward me. A surveillance shot, grainy but clear enough. Celeste stepping into the same hotel as before, but this time, she wasn't with the man from the bar. A different one. "This was 2 nights ago," Gideon said. "Same hotel, different guy." I picked up the next photo. Celeste again. Another meeting. Another man. I forced my expression to stay blank. "This isn't an affair," I said. "No," Gideon agreed. "If it were, she'd be a lot more careful. She's not sneaking around in the usual way. She's not hiding in back alleys or using different names to check in. She's going in through the front doors, confident, like she has a reason to be there." I flipped through the rest of the photos. There were 3 different men in total. Suits, polished, the kind of people who didn't get their hands dirty but knew exactly how to give orders to those who did. "Who are they?" I asked. Gideon tapped his fingers on the desk. "That's the interesting part, the first one." He pointed to the man from the bar, the one I saw with her that night. "Daniel Cross. Works in corporate finance. Keeps his nose clean. But he's got ties to some questionable money. Companies that exist on paper but don't seem to actually do much. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, that kind of thing." He slid another file toward me. "Second guy is Michael Langley. Private equity. A little less clean than Cross. He's been investigated a few times for fraud, but nothing ever stuck." "And the third?" Gideon exhaled through his nose, flipping to the last profile. "This is where it gets messy. Adrian Velasquez. Works out of Miami. Officially, he runs a logistics company. Unofficially, he launders money for some very dangerous people." I let that sink in. "Celeste is mixed up in this," I said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Gideon said. "And not by accident." I leaned back, staring at the photos. Celeste wasn't meeting some lover in secret. She was sitting at the table with men who had power, men who moved money through channels designed to stay hidden. "She's not being used," I said. "She's in control." Gideon didn't argue. He didn't need to. This wasn't about an affair. It was something bigger. Something much worse. I told Celeste I had to leave town for a few days. A last-minute trip to San Francisco for a merger that couldn't wait. She barely reacted, just nodded, barely glancing up from her phone. "Will you be back by the weekend?" she asked. "I should be," I said. It was a lie. I wasn't going anywhere. By the time I walked out of the house, my bag packed with nothing but dead weight, Gideon was already set up. A car was waiting a few blocks away, a vantage point chosen for its clear view of the house. Cameras had been planted, subtle, untraceable. He had eyes on her phone, on her car, even on her work laptop. She had no idea. I spent the night at a loft downtown, watching the first feed come in. It didn't take long. An hour after I left, Celeste changed. She wasn't the woman I had breakfast with that morning, the one who barely spared me a glance as I kissed her goodbye. The moment she thought I was gone, her whole posture shifted. She moved through the house with purpose, pulled a duffel bag from the closet, checked her phone again, the same number flashing on the screen. Then she left. I followed her through the cameras as she drove, taking the same turns I'd seen before, heading straight for the business district. She parked in the underground lot of an office building I wasn't familiar with. Gideon fed me details through the earpiece. "Not registered to her company," he said. "Looks like it belongs to one of our guys. Langley. Michael Langley. Private equity. A man who knew how to move money without ever touching it." Celeste entered the building without hesitation. The security guard didn't even stop her. She belonged there. I exhaled, forcing myself to sit back in my chair. "She's in deeper than I thought," I said. Gideon hummed. "You sure you want to see how deep?" I didn't answer. 2 hours later, Celeste emerged, phone to her ear. She spoke fast, her expression sharp, focused. No sign of hesitation, no sign of doubt. She got into her car, drove straight to the hotel. The same one as before. I switched feeds, watching as she pulled into valet, walked in without breaking stride. The man from before, Daniel Cross, was already waiting for her at the bar. She sat beside him, ordered a drink, leaned in close as they spoke. No affection, no lingering touches. This wasn't personal, it was business. The camera feed picked up fragments of their conversation. Secured the first wire. Should clear by Friday. Tell him I'll be in touch. Nothing I liked, everything I needed. I stood, grabbed my keys. I wasn't going to wait anymore. It was time to get closer. I didn't go home. I didn't call her. I didn't let on that I knew anything. Instead, I set the trap. The following morning, I made sure Celeste saw me before she left for work. She stood in front of the mirror, fixing an earring, her focus on her reflection rather than me. Trip got pushed back, I said, adjusting my cufflinks. Her hand stilled. Pushed back. She repeated, recovering quickly. She turned, giving me that easy smile. That's good, right? Less rushing around. I nodded, pretending not to notice how she glanced at her phone. I'll probably leave tomorrow instead, I said. Nothing urgent, just cleaning up some paperwork. I watched for the reaction. A flicker of something in her eyes, barely noticeable. Not fear, not relief. Something else. She stepped close, smoothing her hands over my shoulders. You work too much. I forced a chuckle, played my part. After she left, I made a call. Start monitoring her calls in real time, I told Gideon. I want to know if she changes anything. I had given her a window. If she was being cautious, she'd use it. By noon, I had my answer. Gideon's voice came through my earpiece. She just called Langley. Told him your trip got delayed. I already knew what would happen next. She's setting up another meeting, I asked. Not yet, Gideon said, but she's making sure you are staying put. She was covering her tracks. That told me she knew she needed to. That evening, I acted normal. Ate dinner, made small talk. Celeste mirrored me, answering without hesitation, but something in the air had shifted. She was watching me too, waiting to see if I had noticed anything. When we went to bed, she curled into my side. For the first time in weeks, she was the one who reached for me. I let it happen, but my mind was somewhere else. This wasn't about catching her in a lie anymore. This was about understanding the game she was playing. And before I made my move, I needed her to think she was still winning. The final report came in the next morning. Gideon didn't call this time. He didn't have to. A single text message lit up my phone. It's worse than we thought. Come now. I was out the door in less than 5 minutes. When I walked into his office, Gideon was already seated, his fingers steepled under his chin. The file on the desk was thicker than the last one. That alone told me everything. I sat across from him and opened it. The first page was a flowchart, a network of accounts and transactions, all connected by thin red lines. My name was in the center. I felt something tighten in my chest. Gideon didn't say a word as I flipped through the pages. Bank statements, offshore accounts, wire transfers, large sums of money, shifting from one shell corporation to another, eventually finding their way into accounts under my company's umbrella. Money I'd never seen. Money I'd never touched. But money that, on paper, looked like it belonged to me. Celeste's name showed up on several documents. Transfers she had authorized. Internal reports she had altered. Everything was careful, deliberate, but not careful enough. I turned the page. A photograph stared back at me. Celeste, seated at a restaurant table, speaking to a man I hadn't seen in any of the previous reports. He was older, his dark hair peppered with gray, his face hard, angular. The name beneath the photo sent ice through my veins. Gabriel Vega. I knew the name. Everyone in my industry did. Vega was a financier, but not the kind that worked on Wall Street. He moved money for people who couldn't afford to have their names attached to bank accounts. Drug cartels, arms dealers, corrupt politicians. If you needed your money to disappear and reappear somewhere safe, Vega was the man to call. And my wife had met with him. The next page was worse. I stared at the image in front of me. Another surveillance shot, grainy but clear enough. Celeste standing beside Vega in a parking garage, handing him a file. My file. I closed the folder, forcing myself to stay calm. "She's using my company," I said, my voice even. "She's moving their money through my accounts." Gideon nodded. "Not just moving it, laundering it. She's been routing it through subsidiaries, covering the trail with legitimate transactions. The IRS wouldn't catch it unless they were looking. But if they ever do look, it all points back to you." I sat back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just Celeste hiding something from me. This was Celeste setting me up to take the fall. I ran a hand over my face, thinking, how long has this been going on? Best estimate. A year. A full year of her sitting across from me at the dinner table, kissing me goodnight, living in my house, knowing that if this all went wrong, I'd be the one in an orange jumpsuit. I closed my eyes, letting the rage settle into something sharper. I needed to act, and fast. But first, I needed to hear it from her. No more surveillance. No more waiting. It was time to confront my wife. I chose the restaurant carefully. Quiet, discreet, the kind of place where privacy was guaranteed. A corner booth with a view of the entrance, where I could watch her walk in. Celeste arrived 5 minutes late. Not unusual for her, but I watched closely, noting every shift in her expression. She was composed, poised, not a trace of hesitation as she slid into the seat across from me. She crossed her legs, setting her purse beside her. A dinner date. That's a surprise. Her tone was light, but I caught the flicker of something else in her eyes. Calculation. She wasn't sure what this was yet. I let the silence stretch, watching her. She tilted her head slightly, studying me in return. "You look tired." "I haven't been sleeping well." Her lips pressed together in something like concern. "Work." I exhaled, tapping a single finger against the folder sitting on the table between us. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. I didn't miss the way her posture changed, the subtle straightening of her spine, the inhale she took before smoothing her expression. She knew. "I thought we should talk," I said. She let out a soft breath, glancing around as if gauging whether this was a public conversation. Then she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "About what?" I opened the folder. The first page was the flowchart. Her gaze landed on it, and for the first time, I saw it, the crack in her composure. It was slight, a flicker of tension around her mouth, but it was there. I slid the second page toward her. The photograph, her with Gabriel Vega. Her fingers hovered over the page, but she didn't touch it. "I want to hear you say it," I said. A heartbeat of silence. Then, softly, "Say what?" I gave her nothing, just waited. She exhaled, her shoulders rising before she sat back. A long moment passed, and then she reached for her wine glass, taking the slow sip before setting it down. When she met my eyes again, the mask had shifted. Not denial, not shock, something else. "You've been following me," she said. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. She traced a finger along the rim of her glass, watching me. "And now what?" "That depends on you." She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head slightly. "You wouldn't be sitting here if you didn't already have a plan." "I do." Her smile was small, almost sad. "And what is it?" I leaned forward, dropping my voice low enough that no one else could hear. "You're going to tell me exactly how deep this goes. Every name, every number, every account you've touched. And then you're going to tell me why." Her eyes searched mine. For what, I wasn't sure. Then she exhaled and leaned back. You already know why. Tell me anyway. She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured. Because it was never yours, she said. Not really. You built something powerful, but you let other people hold the strings. I cut them. I studied her. You could have told me. She laughed again, but this time there was something sharp in it. And you would have what? Approved. She shook her head. No, Logan. You would have tried to stop me, just like you're trying to now. I stared at her, the weight of her words settling into place. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't apologizing. She had done this knowing exactly what it would cost. I sat back, letting out a slow breath. Then you know what happens next. She held my gaze, unreadable. Do I? I reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out the second folder. A thinner one, this time. I placed it in front of her. She didn't open it. I tapped a finger against it. That's everything. The accounts, the offshore holdings, the names. Copies have already been sent to the right people. If you run, you won't get far. Her jaw tensed. Then, after a long pause, she lifted the folder, flipping it open. Her eyes scanned the contents. When she closed it, she let out a slow exhale. Then she looked at me again. And yet, she said, you didn't walk in here with the feds. No. Her lips pressed together, a breath passing between them. And then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. It wasn't relief. It wasn't mockery. It was something else. You want something, she said. I watched her, saying nothing. Her fingers drummed once against the folder. Then she tilted her head slightly, the amusement creeping into her voice. Come with me, she said. I inhaled slowly. We could disappear, she continued. Walk away from all of it. Start over, just us. No empire. No enemies. My pulse ticked up. And what happens when they come looking? She held my gaze. They won't. She said it like a promise, like a certainty. I searched her face, looking for the lie. I didn't find one. A long moment stretched between us. Then I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You think I'd walk away from everything? Her smile didn't waver. I think you already know the answer. I didn't break eye contact. Did I? I sat there, the weight of everything pressing in. The years, the power, the control. Celeste had made her move. Now it was my turn. I walked away from the restaurant without looking back. Celeste's last words echoed in my head, the offer she had laid at my feet like a poisoned gift. Come with me. It wasn't just an escape she was offering. It was a world where nothing tied us down. No empire, no boardrooms, no enemies lurking in the shadows. A world where she believed we could outrun everything. But she had made one mistake. I didn't run. By the time I reached my car, I had already made my decision. The envelope with every piece of evidence sat on the passenger seat, waiting. I picked it up, weighing it in my hands. It wasn't just Celeste's future inside. It was mine too. One call, and it was over. I dialed Gideon. He picked up on the first ring. You make a decision. I glanced back at the restaurant, half expecting to see Celeste walking out, looking for me. But she wasn't. She was waiting, still believing she could pull me into the abyss with her. I made it. I said, do it. Gideon exhaled. All right. You know, once I send this, there's no coming back. I know. Then consider it done. I hung up, gripping the steering wheel. The match had been lit. By morning, the cracks would be impossible to hide. The IRS would have the reports on the offshore accounts, the FBI would have the transaction records, and Vega would know his operation had been exposed. There wouldn't be a single place Celeste could hide where they wouldn't find her. And neither could I. I drove home knowing exactly what I would find. Celeste was already there, waiting in the dim light of the living room. Her posture was relaxed, too controlled, like she had anticipated my return, already calculated every move I might make. "You left so suddenly," she said, her voice smooth. I wasn't finished. There was nothing left to say. She watched me, head tilted slightly, searching my face for cracks. "Is that so?" I set my keys down on the counter, stepping closer. "It's over, Celeste." A beat of silence. Then she sighed, shaking her head with something almost like amusement. "You think you've won. I don't need to win. I just need you to lose." Her expression didn't shift, but I saw it, the faintest flicker in her eyes. She knew. She felt it unraveling beneath her feet. "I should have known you'd choose the fire," she murmured. "You gave me no choice." She exhaled, stepping forward, placing a hand on my chest. "You could have come with me," she said, quieter now. "We could have had something real." I covered her hand with mine, gripping it just tight enough for her to know that whatever we had was already gone. "We did," I said. "And you burned it." For the first time, her confidence faltered. I saw it in the way her throat tightened, the way her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something but stopped herself. Then the mask slid back into place. "I suppose we'll see who survives this, then." I let her go, turned away, and walked out the door. By dawn, the authorities would come. The empire we built would collapse in flames. The money, the power, all of it consumed in the fallout. Celeste would run. She'd fight. She'd do whatever it took to survive. But so would I. Because this wasn't just about justice. This was about making sure that when the fire finally burned out, I would be the one still standing. Epilogue. The city was different, quieter. No boardrooms, no late-night deals, no empire waiting for him to control it. Just a modest office with a view of a skyline that meant nothing to him. A fresh start, or something close enough to it. Logan leaned back in his chair, rolling a glass of whiskey between his palms. He hadn't touched it yet. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because drinking alone had never been his style, or maybe because for the first time in a long time, he had no reason to celebrate. A single envelope sat on his desk, already opened. Inside was a wedding photo, edges worn from time. He traced his fingers over it absently, eyes landing on the words scrawled on the back. "You never really knew me, but I always knew you." Celeste's handwriting. Precise, elegant, just like everything else about her. She was gone. Slipped through the cracks before the authorities could close in, before anyone could put her in cuffs. Gideon had called it a clean exit. Logan knew better. There was no such thing. She was out there, somewhere, waiting, rebuilding. He exhaled, flipping the photo over again. Their wedding day. A different version of himself, smiling down at her like she was the only thing in the world. Back then, maybe she had been. He set the glass down, untouched. The fire had burned everything. The empire, the marriage, the illusion that any of it had ever been real. And yet, she had left him this. A message. A reminder. Not a threat. Not a goodbye. A challenge. Logan smiled, folding the note carefully before tucking it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He always won. But for the first time in his life, it didn't feel like victory. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.